welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. Hello, friends. We are back in Murray, Kentucky with attorney Jeff Roberts. In today's episode, we're going to focus on traumatic brain injuries. Jeff, good to see you.
Good to see you, Jim.
Absolutely. So you see these a lot in your over 30 years. I mean, you've practiced, obviously, personal injury, but you've also done workers' comp and Social Security disability. And brain injuries kind of trip across all three of them, I would think, right?
They can, certainly. I've represented people who've had brain injuries in the past who are now disabled and on the Social Security disability claim. And then frequently in motor vehicle collisions, you will have someone that suffers a traumatic brain injury there. And not as frequently in a work injury, but occasionally you do have some work injuries, especially long falls and things of that nature where a person has a traumatic brain injury. So I've had more experience with traumatic brain injuries over my career than I expected when I first started.
Now, we might, from time to time, refer to these as TBIs. That's another common way of describing it, just stands for traumatic brain injury. So other people have closed head injuries. I hear that as well. I mean, is that synonymous or is that a different type of head injury?
No, a closed head injury can be a traumatic brain injury from that standpoint. Basically, closed head injury just means the bone wasn't, the skull was not cracked. At least that's the way I understand that term. It's been described to me by doctors from that standpoint. But and a lot of people for a while didn't think you could have significant trauma to the brain without when it was a closed head injury, but that has the thinking on that has changed drastically during my career from that, and it's become much more part of the mainstream thought process as well. We've seen a lot of that talk about that with the concussions and post-concussion issues with football players, and the impact of having multiple injuries over time and how that can increase the damage done to someone.
Well, I think as technology advances as well, we're able to better diagnose what's really going on, because you may see that as that's a mood change, but actually that could be a symptom. With that being said, let me kind of outline today, we're going to talk about various causes of traumatic brain injuries. We'll move into symptoms, and then also what kind of doctors you might want to see if you suspect you have a brain injury or a family member may pick up on it and need to try to get you some help. So, Jeff, let's talk, and we did this in the intro, some of the causes, obviously, a car wreck, possibly a workplace injury, motorcycle accidents. We just did a podcast earlier on motorcycle accidents and prepping for motorcycle season. But unfortunately, a lot of those people, when they have a collision, that could result very much in a head injury.
Absolutely can, and that's one of the reasons I strongly recommend people to wear a helmet when they ride a motorcycle from that standpoint. But yeah, the causes for traumatic brain injuries vary obviously, but motor vehicle collisions is one of the causes that I see the most of in my practice, and in looking and doing some research on traumatic brain injuries. That is a very prevalent cause of traumatic brain injuries. Falls, again, is another cause of traumatic brain injuries. If someone falls from any kind of height and strikes their head on concrete or a hard surface, that can cause a traumatic brain injury. Other causes, violence, getting struck by a hard object from that standpoint can cause that. Sports injuries, I mentioned earlier,
exactly.
The NFL situation, and one that some people don't really kind of think about going in, but does occur is from the standpoint of if you work around or are close to an explosion when it occurs, the blast
that concussion
from that can sometimes cause traumatic brain injuries.
Wow. And now I've heard that actually, this is just research that I've been involved with, it doesn't have to be a physical impact to the head, because it's the brain moving quickly against the inside surface of the skull. That collision there often is what's resulting or causing the brain injury. But that can occur in speeds as low as 17 miles an hour is the research I've read, which is amazing to me, because you think big highway crash or something like that, it really doesn't take that much because that body is still moving at the time of the collision. So all that slams, at a higher rate than people sometimes understand.
True. The research you're talking about is not one that I'm
Yeah.
familiar with,
Yeah.
but I knew that relatively low speed collisions can result in mild traumatic brain injuries. From that standpoint, and you're absolutely right. You do not actually have to have a blow to the head for a person to have a traumatic brain injury. In most of the car wrecks that I see, the person is belted,
Yep.
so their head does not actually strike anything other than potentially the airbag if they have a driver's side airbag or a passenger side airbag in the vehicle. But it's the head going forward in the brain moving inside the skull that's causing the traumatic brain injury in that setting. And at least the doctors I've talked to in representing my clients in the past, that's how they explain it to me. Very similar to exactly what you just mentioned, the movement within the skull cavity itself.
Well, the unfortunate thing about a brain injury is it's a permanent injury. It's not something that heals itself, but you learn to adapt. I mean, ideally, if you've got some good therapy, if you've got some good people working with you, you can learn to deal with the current situation. But generally, it's my understanding that the brain injury itself does not repair. Like a broken arm, eventually the bone, refuses and you move forward. But a brain injury seems to be different.
Depending on the severity, and they for a long time they called concussions and other things mild traumatic brain injuries, and they're, at least my experiences, I think they're trying to go away from that to some extent because
does that downplay the severity?
Because it tends to downplay the severity of the issue, and that I'm not trying to say that everybody who has a concussion is going to have lifelong problems as a result of that, but certainly you can develop post-concussive syndromes, and if you have multiple concussions, the studies show now that the chances of developing greater problems down the road are there.
Parkinson's, dementia,
Alzheimer's, those type of things can occur in the more trauma that you have. At least what I'm seeing now is the greater the chances of that developing for somebody in the future.
Well, let me ask you this. As an attorney who handles these cases, when you're looking at actually making a claim for damages on behalf of the client, do you have to take into account the fact that, hey, this could accelerate the onset of Parkinson's, because that's sometimes so far down the road, but do you actually account for that in some of your settlement discussions? I mean, how does that work?
Yes, that is something that you definitely want to account for when you're dealing with a car accident or a work injury. If it is a traumatic brain injury that the doctors are indicating that's the potential occurrence in this situation, unfortunately, sometimes you're not going to know for several years down the road. Well, in a car accident case, whenever that case is resolved either by settlement or by a jury verdict, I can't come back 10 years down the road and say, oh, jury, you should award my client more money now, because we do know they have developed dementia because of the traumatic brain injury. So you have to put that evidence in front of the jury or in front of the person making the determination on settlement, or if it's a work injury, in front of the judge making the decision in that case, so that they are aware of that potential damage. And one of the items of damage in a car accident case or any personal injury case from that standpoint is likely future medical treatment, and also the impairment of your earning capacity. So, even if the person is working now, if they're likely to develop these issues and lose employment or have to retire much sooner because of the effects of the traumatic brain injury, then having that's where expert witnesses come in, not only doctors but vocational experts, economists, to quantify that for a jury or for the adjuster if you're trying to settle the case, in having an attorney that is familiar with these processes and knows what you have to do, and the proper experts can make a huge difference for you.
And I would think a lot of this testimony really is reliant upon getting the right doctors and vocational experts to be able to explain to the judge or explain to the jury, this is what we're really doing. Because you can't see a brain injury, right? I mean, I could see a broken bone, I could see scarring, and I could see, sores, from road rash in a motorcycle accident. I can see that. But that person could be sitting in the chair right next to you at trial and look perfectly normal.
Exactly. You can't look at the person and tell that they've had a mild or a traumatic brain injury as a general rule. They are starting to develop some testing that will show it much better than what has been in the past. A lot of times MRIs you can see some damage from that standpoint, that they're developing some additional studies now that can be color contrasted, where you can actually see where the damage is much better than what we've been able to do in the past from that standpoint. And so I'm starting to see greater strides in that area of documenting it much better
Fantastic for the patient, for the injury victim.
For the injury victim and for the decision makers in these cases. It's very, very helpful because, we are visual learners. Most people, the studies have been done, and I can't remember, I didn't look that up, but a lot of people, when you tell somebody something, they remember it a certain amount. You show them, they remember it a greater amount. You tell and show, they remember it at a much greater amount from that. So being able to not only have a doctor explain the traumatic brain injury, but then have images that can document that are very helpful in the jury or whoever the decision maker is truly understanding what damage has occurred to the injured person.
Well, I guess if you're, again, negotiating with the insurance adjuster on the other side for the at-fault driver or whomever, it makes it much harder to discount the severity of that injury, because now not only do we have expert testimony, but we also have imagery that can kind of substantiate what they're saying.
Exactly.
And it's not just theory, it's actually occurring in the gentleman or the lady sitting right beside me who is my client.
Yeah, and I've seen it in my career, with people who've had broken bones, and the offers that I would get back from insurance companies, if we just hit the medical records that said this person had a broken femur, versus getting the X-ray of the break, and then basically an X-ray essentially is a negative, like a photograph negative, and you can make a positive out of that and make it a photograph, and having that photograph of the actual break and sending that in to the insurance adjuster, where they can see the severity of the break instead of just reading it on the medical record, makes a huge difference in the offers that I would get back from insurance companies. And I think we're just getting this new technology, so to speak, with the brain injury. I'm using it in a couple of cases now, and I think I'm going to see the exact same thing with this. That's documenting in where they can visually see. Okay, this helps me to understand better the severity of this injury.
Well, so much of it is your ability to explain it also to the judge. It's not just the expert; it's you on behalf of your client being able to explain this is what we're dealing with.
Correct.
And be able to do so convincingly, which is a trial lawyer. That's your career.
Correct. Exactly. That's what my job is. Yeah. I mean, that's when I take on the representation of a client. My job is to convince whoever the decision maker is of the severity of my client's injuries, and I need to do that as in the best way possible, in using my own techniques and also using the proper experts and the proper visual aids all come into doing that.
Picture's worth 1,000 words, right?
Correct.
There you go. Jeff, let's transition the conversation over into symptoms. And this is something that I've always found intriguing, because this is, sometimes there are things that are very noticeable and you're thinking, okay, that, so-and-so is just off right now. This is a change in their behavior or their speech. And other things you don't necessarily correlate with, it must be a brain injury. I mean, some of these things are really, really interesting.
They are, initially, a lot of the initial symptoms that you see in the literature talks about is, the person has headaches, shortly after the trauma, they have headaches that can persist for a long period of time. From there, nausea and vomiting
Right.
as well can occur from that standpoint.
It's a key sign in the situation where there's a concussion. A lot of times you see that,
Exactly.
which again is a brain injury.
Yeah, that is a brain injury, exactly. From there, and one thing that people don't realize that there's a symptom that continues on is fatigue. People with traumatic brain injuries can and frequently do tire out much quicker and get fatigued much quicker. From there, you see a lot of times dizziness or balance issues that the person has. Those are all kind of physical symptoms that the person has as a result of a traumatic brain injury. The person can also have more symptoms that are kind of sensory based, bothered by bright lights, bothered by certain sounds from that standpoint, blurred vision type problems that they can have as a result of a traumatic brain injury. And then the one that you also see is kind of cognitive and behavioral.
This is the area that really intrigues me, is because I'm just astounded that this is how it manifests. But for a family member, these are some red flags that they need to look at.
Exactly.
This is I really like this. So I'm sorry for interrupting you, but this is important stuff.
Well, you made a very important observation right there. Because you said this is something that the family members need to look forward to. The physical symptoms, the headache, the nausea, vomiting, balance issues. The person, they know they're having those symptoms. They realize that. The sensory symptoms, the blurred vision, the sensitivity to the light and sensitivity to certain sounds, they realize they're having those symptoms. A lot of times the cognitive and the behavioral changes, they don't realize
it's
they're
normal
having
for them.
those.
It's normal for them.
Yeah,
Right now.
it can be very gradual occurrence over it, and they don't realize that it's occurring from that standpoint. And you see that with people who have a lot of mental health issues. They don't realize. A lot of people who are depressed don't realize they're depressed. But when you have brain injuries that affect cognitive and behaviorally affect you, usually it's the people closest to you who realize and see what's going on.
Dad or mom is just different, right? So let's kind of describe some of those changes that might be red flags for family members. I mean, I would think short-term memory loss is a red flag, and also I've heard mood swings.
Yes, mood changes, mood swings are another one. The short-term memory is a issue that you see frequently as well. So a person who never had to be reminded to take medication before, now having to be reminded to take their medication, or who never missed an appointment, and now are, unless it's written down or you remind them, they don't remember that they've got a doctor's appointment or a hair appointment or whatever the appointment may be. Those can be symptoms of that there's memory impairment associated with the brain injury. And then the mood, that can come in, somebody who's always kind of happy-go-lucky and let things roll off their back, and now something that's relatively minor that would never have bothered them before causes them to go off and go off the handle, so to speak, and yell. Or if it's somebody who would never yelled before, but now when they get upset, they yell over something. And some gets to the point that they throw out objects and things of that nature, which is completely out of what their character was beforehand. And they can have those kind of type of changes with their mood and their behaviors. Again, that's where they don't realize they've changed in that regard. They think they're justified in the actions that they're taking from that standpoint. But the family members look at it and say, Jim never acted like this before. What's going on with Jim? And you family members sometimes will talk about that among themselves and never, because it could be a couple months after the car wreck occurred that these symptoms show themselves, and so they don't even relate it back to potentially the car wreck.
I'm really glad you said that because that's what I think throws a lot of people because hey, we're on down the road. He was fine or she was fine. You know, the week after, yeah, she had a couple of headaches, but she just maybe hit her head on the dashboard or something in a car wreck. So you understand that. But then as it persists or as it develops with a late onset as opposed to early onset, I think it's again these are great red flags, and I'm so glad you're talking about them because family members need to be aware.
And exactly. And the other thing that I've seen occur over time, over the years in practicing, is because these are symptoms that are, the spouse, the children are seeing instead of the person. They don't get told to the doctor as often either. So, if you are a spouse of someone who's, or a child or parent, if it's a child that's involved in a car wreck, and you're seeing these symptoms, make sure you let the doctor, the family doctor, if that's who they're going to, if they're going to a specialist, make sure you let them know about these changes because the sooner that it's diagnosed and treated, the better the recovery can be in those situations.
Well, and that means also getting it documented in the medical notes. And that's why you want to be there at those appointments to really have that conversation with the doctor. Because, again, as you said earlier, the person that's exhibiting these traits or these changes doesn't really realize they think they're justified. Hey, no, I just got upset because you did this. Well, yeah, but that was overkill for you, and that was out of character for you, and maybe it was a little much, and so that sense of severity they just don't pick up on. But if you're around them, you're going to see it.
Exactly, and even when you tell the person, sometimes they don't.
Right.
They may think you're overreacting or whatever. So making sure that it's being, somebody in the medical field is being advised of those symptoms so that the person can get the proper treatment for it. From that standpoint, and that kind of transitions into who should these individuals be seen. When that, if frequently people go to, initially go to the emergency room, and if you're having headaches or you had any sort of trauma, they're going to do a CAT scan, but they're looking for a brain bleed. Frankly,
right.
That's
There's something that'll show up in an imagery somewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so they're looking for that situation, and then frequently people go to the family doctor after that for treatment. Well, if you're having the signs of a traumatic brain injury, then the family doctor most likely is going to end up referring you to a neurologist for them to look at you a little further. And you see neurologists treating TBIs fairly regularly. You can also, depending on what the person is going through and some of the symptoms, because depression and anxiety and PTSD can come about from all of these things as well. So the person going to and seeing a mental health professional, a psychologist, can be very helpful in managing some of the symptoms that the individual is having from that. And then a specialist that a lot of people have frankly never heard of before unless they've been involved in the medical field or the legal field, personal injury field, is a neuropsychologist who can do testing and have the person go through testing and see what areas of the brain have been affected, and then make recommendations on what type of therapy, cognitive therapy, and that the person needs to go through to help improve their functioning again.
Well, in that they may never get back to normal as it were before the accident, but it can help get them back to where they can function and they can move forward. And I think a lot of times that's sometimes the best you can offer is let's help you move forward beyond this. Because again, these are permanent injuries, and that's why they're so severe. And that's why the documentation and the treatment really, really need to be as robust as possible.
Right. And traumatic brain injuries, you have some that are very, very severe, very serious, that, everybody notices that person has something, had a traumatic brain injury from this wreck, and they can affect the person's, people who will act very, very inappropriately.
Yep.
And a lot of people, anybody that meets them and spends any time around them says, okay, something's off with this person. And doctors are going to realize that as well. And those people tend to get the treatment because the injury is much more obvious to them, even if there's not a obvious physical trauma to the brain. The brain trauma is more physically noticed. The concussions and the what was called mild traumatic brain injury that they're trying to go away from. Now they're looking at those are the ones that tend to go unnoticed for a period of time, if ever getting noticed. Frankly, sometimes they, I may get involved in a case a year after the accident, and when I have the conversations, suspect that the person very well may have had a TBI, a mild TBI, but nobody's ever really looked at it up until that point, and then you got to kind of go back and recreate the wheel, so to speak, which can be very difficult to do.
Well, I think that would be the ideal time to bring in a neuropsychologist because, again, a mood swing, a change in demeanor, short-term memory, that's not going to show up on a scan somewhere. I mean, that is something they have to deal with and they have to assess, and they have their own tests and conversations. They have their own techniques for determining all of that.
Right, and exactly, that's where it comes in. And a lot of people think that when I'm gotten involved in these, that someone has to have a loss of consciousness to have a TBI, and that's at least from conversations with the doctors I've had and what I've seen, that's not correct. That you do not have to have a loss of consciousness to have a traumatic brain injury. Most people who have a concussion don't have a loss of consciousness associated with that. So you can have a TBI without truly losing consciousness or even having an altered sensation of altered consciousness for a while. Being, some people after a blow can be very dizzy and not be aware of their surroundings, never lose complete consciousness, but not aware of their surroundings. But some don't have that. They don't have any of those symptoms, but still have a TBI. So it can go undiagnosed and untreated for a long period of time if it's not looked for, to be honest.
And Jeff, you mentioned earlier in this episode, and this is something I really would like you to kind of come back to and underscore this for your audience. When you settle an injury claim, at the end of it, you're going to sign a release, which releases that at-fault driver or the insurance company or whatever from, in other words, I can't go back 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and try to come after you for more money because suddenly I realize, hey, there's a brain injury here. You really have to be careful about that. And that's where your experience with the 30 years of doing this really comes into play because you've seen these. You've seen them from various situations. You've seen them in all sorts of different clients. And I think being aware of that on the front end really, really helps that client.
It does, and you're correct. Once the case on a civil case for a motor vehicle collision or something of that nature, once the case is resolved, it's resolved. You cannot go back in to get any increase in benefits. Workers' comp is slightly different from that in that, as a general rule, on a settlement of a workers' compensation claim, medical benefits are left open so that the employer or the workers' comp insurance carrier is responsible for future medical associated with that work injury.
And again, we're talking Kentucky workers' comp.
Kentucky workers' comp, yes. I'm not licensed to handle workers' comp cases anywhere but Kentucky. But that's the way it is, and it's very, very, very rare that I ever recommend somebody settle future medical benefits in a workers' compensation claim because you never know what the future is going to hold.
Exactly.
And that's part of the reason why the person may find out later they had something they didn't realize they had until later and come back in, and then you can potentially get that covered in that setting in the medical treatment. And unfortunately, you're not going to get the compensation for it. But if it's but having an attorney who knows to look for this before the case is resolved lets you get that compensation at the time that the case is being resolved, so you know that potential is out there.
Well, again, I mean, I know we've always said it, but experience matters, and the fact that you've handled both the civil, the car wreck type case, the truck wreck, the motorcycle accident case, and you've handled the Kentucky workers' comp case, you understand how both of these systems work, and you understand what needs to be done up front. You understand how to manage that case and how to get them to the proper medical treatment professionals, that can do this, whether it's a psychologist, neuropsychologist, whether it's a therapist of some sort, whether it's some other type of surgeon or specialist who really understands, I'm familiar with this area. This is not something the general practitioner attorney or something the general practitioner or doctor needs to handle. I mean, you need to get serious, qualified medical professionals involved.
Absolutely. And, that's from doing a personal injury practice for 30 years and essentially in my private practice, exclusively doing personal injury, I see a variety of doctors and outcomes from that standpoint. I never tell a client who to go to for treatment purposes at all. I think that's a personal decision from there. But if I know there are doctors that are having excellent results for traumatic brain injuries or spinal injuries or whatever, then I may say, I may give them that name and say,
consider this one.
You might want to look this person up or do something of that nature. I don't say go see this doctor for treatment purposes. I think that's a personal decision. Now, as far as experts in the case, I do make that decision from there, and getting the best experts is very important. But I see my goal, and I hope all attorneys that do this, that represent injured parties, see their goal this way as well. But I see my goal is first to get the client the best medical treatment possible, and that's where my seeing a bunch of different doctors and seeing different treatments from that standpoint can come into play, because when my client has the best outcome they can have from that case, getting their claim resolved is a whole lot easier. At least from my perspective, I think it is, and I think my experience has bared that out.
I think your
from that
I think
standpoint.
your reviews on your website on Google bear that out. I
Yeah.
mean, you've got a lot of people who have come back and said, you know what, Jeff Roberts really took the time on this. Jeff Roberts did this. Jeff Roberts, thrilled us with what he was able to do for us. And I've always encouraged people to go take a look at the Google reviews. Go take a look at the reviews that you might find on Facebook. That's someone else who's worked with Jeff, talking about their experience, and I'm amazed at how many positive reviews that you've actually earned. And I say that with specificity. You've earned them.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and again, that comes back, I think, to my view on this, and that is my goal is to resolve the person's claim to the best of my ability from that. But the initial goal is to help my client get the best physically, mentally, et cetera, that they can be from a medical. I don't provide treatment. I'm not a doctor at all, so don't take it that way. But to help them to get the best recovery they can, because that, when I resolve the claim, that takes care of their immediate financial needs, and hopefully will help take care of their long-term financial needs, depending on the severity of the injuries, obviously, from that standpoint. But helping them get to the best from a medical standpoint as well helps both of those, helps their quality of life in the future. And that's what that's what I'm trying to do, is to make sure my clients have the best quality of life they potentially can going forward, not only financially from the settlement of the claim, but medically as well.
Well, and Jeff, let's wrap up with this. You've actually got two offices. I mean, your primary office is right here in Calloway County, in Murray, Kentucky. But you also have an office up in Hopkinsville, which is over in Christian County. And if somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do so?
Best way for them to do so is to call my office, 270-753-0053, and then we can set up an appointment with you. Then I still, even after COVID, I still prefer face-to-face conversations. That's one of the reasons I opened the satellite office up in Hopkinsville, is so clients up in that area I represent and have for years represented a lot of people up in that area, and so they didn't have to drive down here. I could have that satellite office meet clients up there. and schedule 3 or 4 or 5 clients in one day to meet up there instead of each of them individually having to drive down here. From that, but the 270-753-0053 is the number to call to schedule the appointments. From that, I can also meet with you over the phone. I can meet with you by video conference if that's what you prefer. From that standpoint, you can also contact me by email at jeff@jeffrobertslaw.com. And so you can contact me. There's a variety of different ways that you can reach out to me.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned the consultations via phone and video conference. As a Kentucky attorney, you can take cases from across the state. I mean, you're not really just a Western Kentucky attorney. I mean, that's where you live. That's where you've done this for so many years. But you regularly are called in on cases all across the state. I mean, you've been up to Louisville many times. You've been up to Northern Kentucky many times. This just happens to be where you're located. Technology makes it a lot easier for you to actually work with those clients on a wider geographic range.
It does, and I have represented clients all over the state during my career, and a lot of times by phone with people who lived in the Louisville, Northern Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky area. From that standpoint, but with the with Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Skype, being able to actually put a face to the client and the clients being able to put a face to me has at least helped. Like I said, I prefer face-to-face meetings, and even if we're doing it over Zoom, at least we can see each other, and that helps in the communication from my standpoint from there. But I'm involved in cases all over the state at this point, and I get brought in on cases by other attorneys up in the Louisville, Northern Kentucky area to assist on cases, and that's just so I don't stay just in Western Kentucky at all from that standpoint. But the largest clientele is Western Kentucky, but I handle cases all over the state. Motor vehicle and workers' comp, like I said earlier, I'm licensed in Kentucky. I handle those cases here. Social Security actually has licensed me to handle cases in all 50 states, so I can handle those and frequently handle those in Tennessee. Since my office is close to the Tennessee state line, I frequently have Social Security cases in Tennessee, but I've handled, I think, last count, 10 different states I've handled Social Security cases in during my career.
Wow, fantastic.
I'm still waiting for somebody from Hawaii to call me up.
That might be a face-to-face. Can we write that off? We'll see. Here we go.
We're going to try.
We're going to try. Jeff, I appreciate your time. This is a serious issue because of just the severity of the type of damage it's done to the injured individual, but also the fact that you were able to share some of those red flag signs for family members, because I think sometimes they're dealing with it and they don't know what to do about it. It may actually be the result of a head injury. It could be a traumatic brain injury. And hopefully this information was not only helpful, but also insightful to go, oh, that may be what's going on. And they need to go talk to the doctor. They need to get that documented. They need to pursue the best outcome based on what they know. Because if the doctor doesn't know about it, if the attorney doesn't know about it, you can't really, bring it into the treatment.
Exactly. And it makes a difference not only now or shortly after the injury, but can have lifelong consequences.
Absolutely. Jeff, once again, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit jeffrobertslaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.